So I'm proud to present Doug Fink. The main subject or the main thing I read in his bio that is 16 times MVP. I think it's number one. So for me, Doug, the floor is yours. I'll make you
Awesome.
also with the
And I'll share
co-host.
my
So
screen.
you can do everything. If you want to send someone home, you can do it.
Sounds like my meetups. Awesome. Awesome. Let's do this. So welcome. My name's Doug Finke, and I'm really appreciate the invite from Israel on come here to present about PowerShell and Excel. I call this my PowerShell automation machine for Excel. So hopefully, learn some things today, have some fun. So quick about me. As mentioned, I'm a 16-time Microsoft MVP. I wrote a book called PowerShell for Developers, and I organized the New York City meetup in the PowerShell AI live stream space. It's free to join. So if you want to figure out that link and stay connected with me, I'm on X at DFINKE. I'm also on LinkedIn. I have a YouTube channel. Definitely suggest going over there. Subscribe and hit the notification bell. I just actually, while we're here, one of my videos are premiering today on some AI stuff and Visual Studio Code. You can check out my GitHub repos where you can find my PowerShell module that we're going to look at today. And I blog as often as I can. So that's enough slides. Let's do
You
some
also
demo.
work more than 24 hours a day.
I'm sorry, what did
So you also work more than 24 hours a day.
I? Actually, I sleep a lot. I take naps during the day. But yeah, I have no idea how I do this stuff. It's interesting because over time when like I've been doing PowerShell since it first came out in 2001, 2002, and it was called Monad. And you know, you learn enough about programming languages, I think, or that I find patterns in all these things. So I can write 5 different libraries that I'm going to do stuff with, and I have a certain pattern approach, so that when I look and have issues, I can actually pop back and go, "Oh, okay, I know what this relates to this and that." But yeah, it's the information stuff is just crazy. But I've been doing this for 100 years, so let's do some demos. Now, I don't know how many people are online, if that many, but if you are, feel free to jump in and ask questions at any point in time. See if I can keep the chat up if you want to. That's great.
I
If
guess the message is they have a problem with connecting, but I hope we'll be solving it on the background. So go ahead.
Okay. So what I'm going to do here is I want to talk a little bit. I want to talk about why I built this integration between PowerShell and Excel. We were chatting just before we went live how long we've been involved with Excel since the 80s. So for some people, that's like probably crazy. Yeah, Excel, spreadsheets, all this kind of stuff has been I think they're fantastic tools. A lot of people hate it. A lot of people love it. I'm one of the people that really love it. And I'm going to show you why I integrated PowerShell with Excel. If you want, what I'm doing here too, just we're not going to go deep into it. I'm using a polyglot interactive notebook. So this is like Jupyter notebooks that was popularized for decades with
Python.
Python. Yep, you got it. And so Microsoft came up with a way for doing .NET. And so when they did the .NET piece, they wrote in a PowerShell kernel. And it's just a nice way to, like, you can separate things into markdown. I look at it as executable documentation. You can have a markdown section, and then I have code that I can execute. I can put links in my markdown and everything. So you can grab this up and you can do an install. This is on the PowerShell gallery if you're familiar or not familiar with it. You can do an install -module hyphen name ImportExcel and take a look. Yep, I just rolled over 8 million downloads. So that's a bit crazy.
Wow.
Yeah, in like 15 days, I had 300,000 downloads. I don't know how they calculate these numbers. I don't know if these are brand new people coming to it, or if they like every time they run their stuff in Azure, they pull a version down, which sounds dangerous for production, but because I do make mistakes when I check the same things in. Haven't made a major mistake in a while. But yeah, so that you can grab it up there. And if you're familiar with GitHub, you can pop over to the ImportExcel piece, and again, you can star this, you can watch it, so you can see when I'm making changes, you can see when I'm making branches, if I'm experimenting with new ideas. I have an entire discussion piece open. Lots of people come in and give feedback. The community is quite good on this to answer questions, and I learned stuff from these folks like, hey, I'm trying to do this and this. I'm like, wow, I never even intended it to work that way. And so it's if you like that kind of stuff, I think it's a great resource. So why did I start down this path? And the reason is that I've always loved visualization of data, right? Like we talked in the 80s, doing stuff with Quattro Pro and Lotus 123, be able to put data into a spreadsheet, grab the range of data, and then say, hey, give me a pie chart, give me this. It just was like, wow, this is really impressive. It makes my life easy. And it, people I worked with were like, how'd you do that? So I looked like a wizard. So as time went on, many different languages came out. I was an assembler coder on mainframes. I was on PC. I learned C, C++. I loved the Visual Basic. I did that as an independent consultant, and I was always looking for tools that I could do visualizations with. And when PowerShell came out, I was like, well, I want to be able to do plots. Why do I want to do that? Well, I played with Python and Ruby when it came out in the mid 90s. So let's take a look at a piece of. We're going to look at some Python. Hopefully that's okay. And I'm in Visual Studio Code. It's my favorite editor. I'm going to just move this over here. And so this is 20 lines of Python. And if you squint, if you're a PowerShell person, if you squint at this, it looks a little bit like PowerShell, right? You can do an import, which is similar to import module that we have in PowerShell. And I'm importing another library or a module or an SDK. It's called matplotlib. Folks who've been around might know about that. And line 5 is interesting because it's creating an array, right? That's very similar to how you do it in PowerShell. The difference is I would put a $sign in front of the X, and I would get rid of this. And if I was in PowerShell, that would create an array. So I'm creating an X array, I'm creating an array Y with those numbers in it, and then I'm calling plot from the matplotlib. I want it to plot X comma Y. I'm going to put some labels on it. I'm going to give it the graph a title, and then I'm going to show it. So if I come down here and I run this, this is what happens if it works. Awesome. So I get a graph, right? And it's that simple. That's why it's called simple plot. But it's that easy to get a graph out of Python. And that works across all operating systems, so on and so forth. I always liked that. I was like, well, I can do all this thing on the left-hand side, right? I can create arrays, and I'll pull data in from a database, or I'll pull in data from JSON, or any kind of different set of places. And I was like, how come I can't do graphing? So I started down the path in the early 2000s with PowerShell. I was like, I want this, how am I going to build it? And I looked at building things like WinForms and WPF forms and using XAML. And there was plotting libraries that we used to use in Visual Basic. And, I was able to set some of those things up, but it was always clunky and brittle and problematic. So I've always looked for this kind of capability no matter where I am, no matter what platform. I think visualizations of data is super important. So just to take so I started thinking how else can I do this thing? So just as a quick note, in PowerShell, you do have access to the Microsoft .NET framework for that, C# and F# and PowerShell can work with. So for example, if I do bracket, is that big? And if it's the font's not big enough, let me know. I can bump it up.
That's good.
So excellent. So I can actually call into a framework, and this is good to know about PowerShell if you get more advanced in PowerShell. You don't think, or even just want to hey, how do I do this? Can I make it faster? PowerShell doesn't have this capability. I want to do X, Y, and Z. So here I'm going to call the tangent function, and it's a static method, and I'm going to say, okay, I want the tangent of 30, and then in the second line, I'm going to say I want to do a math sine divided by the cosine of 30, right? So I can click the run button, and this is the cool part of interactive notebooks. Here's my PowerShell code, and I can just run it, see, okay, I get some answers. There's another way back in the day before, we were like, oh, well, how else can we extend PowerShell? Well, you can actually write a PowerShell. You can write a C# code, right? So I'm going to create a class called text X. It's going to take a method add, takes 2 numbers, N1 and N2, and I'm going to return that. Now, this is a string. And what's interesting is, if you know, again, if you want to expand your PowerShell capabilities, if I put it in a here string, which is @ quote, and then quote @, I'm just passing this string of C# into something called add type, and that's built into PowerShell. And what that does is when I run it, it actually compiles that class on the fly. And so I can actually compile C# on the fly, and then I can actually use it inside my PowerShell. That opens up the doors for lots of things if that's what you're interested in. And I was like, well, maybe I'm going to have to build that if I want to get my visualizations in PowerShell. So I'm just going to build it, and then I'm just going to do a range operator and say from 2 to 5 for each one of those objects. I'm going to create this new object called test X one time, well, actually multiple times. And I'm going to pass in the current object and a 6, and it should add the number 2 to 6, I think, right? So let's run that. Yeah, we're going to have our first glitch today. Come on. Okay, so I don't know why that took that long. But anyway, that should be split second. And if I run it again, you see it's sub-second. So I just created a C# piece of code, and I interacted it directly with PowerShell after I did an add type, read it, compiled it, ready to go. Okay, so let's move along. So back in the day, there was something called, COM objects. We who play with Excel over the decades, component object model, right? That's how you could do DDE, dynamic data exchange between Excel and Word. You could put a Word document, take a Word document and drop an Excel object into it. And then if you updated the Excel, it would update the Word. So there was all kinds of cool stuff. And then they moved on to something called component object models. And PowerShell made that capable to use by doing something where you do a new object, and you can use the COM object, and you can say Excel application. So let's take a look at what that is. Awesome. My screen is set. So what I'm going to do is run this code. And keep an eye on the back. I'm going to run don't worry about that. I'm just trying to making sure that Excel's not running. And I'm going to do a new object. I'm going to say COM object Excel application. So it knows how to look up in the registry what Excel is. It's going to create it, and it's actually going to run it. And then I'm going to store that in the variable $Excel. And this is all PowerShell. And then I'm going to do the .visible = true. So let's run that up and see if we get what we want. And as we can see, I created Excel, and I'm running it. So I'm basically controlling Excel from PowerShell. So while we're not going to talk about this in depth, this is definitely something that you keep in the back of your mind as an option that you could try and use if you think it's important or useful to what applications you're building. So now I'm controlling $Excel has that access to the object model. So if you did Visual Basic Applications, it's the same object model you use in VBA, right? And it's the same thing when they built interop, Office interop for Excel and other languages. It's the same object model that you use there when you build those applications that way. If you want to use it from a web page, right? If you can use ASP.NET, you can do the same thing with those libraries. So again, it's all about object models. PowerShell is an object-oriented shell, so you can actually work with the same object model. So really quick, because it's a fun example, I'm going to now, in here, I'm going to say $Excel workbooks add, and I'll save that in the WB for the workbook variable. We run that, and you can see I've now from PowerShell created a workbook, and it automatically creates sheet 1. I can then run this cell, and I'm just going to grab the reference to that sheet into $WS. Now comes more fun. So if you remember how cells work inside of VBA, if you've done that type of thing, you can then say, well, I'm going to take cells and I'm going to do 1, 1, 1, 2, right? So that's going to go down from, in row 1, I'm going to go across 5 columns, and I'm going to poke this data into Excel. So keep an eye on the Excel spreadsheet. And now I run it, and I just poked the data from PowerShell into Excel. So I started running Excel, I created a sheet, and I was able to poke some data into it. I was like, oh, wow, this could be useful. So we'll just go and add a couple of records. Okay, well, watch again. I'm going to do the same thing, but now I'm going to put some values into row 2. And what's interesting is, notice here, I'm doing equals C2 times D2, right? So I can actually poke a formula in. And when I poke the formula in, right, it doesn't just show the formula. Excel does the thing that it does great. It actually resolves the formula and does the calculation, right? So if I double click on this, right, I can see the formula, I can see the quantities times price. And now I'm like, wow, this is really getting interesting. So we'll just do a couple more because
if you wouldn't write the formula, just the value and keep the equation, it wouldn't be calculated?
So say that one more time. If
instead of the word formula, you write the word value, and the content still remains the same. So Excel will calculate it anyway.
That's true. But if I said like dot value after formula, if I understand what you're saying, then it would overwrite the formula and it wouldn't calculate it. I don't know if I'm following you.
No, just change the formula to value and run it.
Right. Oh, gotcha. Let's do that. So let's do it on record 2. I'm going to say value. Yep. And we should see the formula. Oh, look at that. I lied. Never tried that. So Excel, let's try to, yeah. So Excel is actually, try one more. This can be a third record. So Excel doesn't care. So once it sees a formula inside of its, so let's try one more time. I'm going to poke in with a quote, a single quote. I think that might keep it. Yeah. Right. So yes, you can get back to the formula, but once Excel sees it and says, oh, that looks like a formula, it'll try to resolve it. Right. So that's kind of cool. And I'm actually controlling all of this from PowerShell. The problem is that if you're going to send out an application to a user or you're going to use it, that means Excel is going to come up. It's going to make it visible. It's going to have to work, or you can make it minimized, and you can turn off screen updating and all kinds of stuff, and you can poke values in and do a bunch of stuff. It gets really slow for large amounts of data, and if somebody says, oh, well, how did that Excel thing pop up there? And then they go over and they click on it, they can mess up your workflow. So while it was cool and it was good, and I could take this further and grab this data programmatically and then plot it, doing it this way through COM automation is brittle, in my opinion. So let me close out of that. So to enter, so I started looking at that. I was excited, and I was like, well, what else can we do? And then came along, I think Microsoft actually, it was around, about that, I guess in the late 90s, the Department of Justice here in America took them to task and said they were a monopoly, especially when it came to the Office products. So they made it so that they had to create, because the XLSX that gets saved used to be a proprietary format. And the government forced them into writing one that was no longer proprietary so that people could write applications on top of it. And they came up with the Office XML approach. So when you actually take an XLSX, if you unzip it, inside you'll see the XML, and that's the representation of the Excel information, the data, the formulas, the pivot tables, the charting, et cetera, et cetera. And Microsoft then came out with something that would actually work with that, and then provided it to the community. And then some folks actually took that and made it even better and kept it up to date, because Microsoft said, we're not going to be in that business. So I was playing around with this and saying, well, maybe I should crack it open myself and I can manipulate the XML. And I was like, that's a lot of work. And then I found a library that could do it. And I was like, well, let me just put all the idiomatic greatness of PowerShell on top of this library that can read and write this thing, and make it work so it's really interesting. So that's what I did. So in PowerShell, you have something called export CSV, right? So if I run get service on my machine, so I don't know how many folks are familiar, so I can get all the services on my machine, right? And it just lists out everything from, it gives an object array. It's got properties called status, name, and display, right? And if I wanted to export that to a CSV file, I can just pipe the get service to export CSV, and I'll save it in a file because it takes a file name called gsv.csv. So let's run that. And don't worry about those errors. That's all good. So I created a GSV file, and what's on my local drive, right? So if I do, so now this is one way that people have used Excel and PowerShell. Save it to a CSV file, open it up in a CSV in Excel, and now I have everything I want. People go, that's great, I'm done. I'm going to send this to my boss. and we're good to go. Now, the problem with this is if I start sizing these pieces up so I can see them better, if I change fonts and whatnot, you know, I can do that for myself, right? But when I save it, if I'm not familiar with Excel, it's gonna come up and save it back to a CSV file. And when I reopen it, it loses all of its format. I have to know to do things like file, save as, and then browse, and then save it as an XLSX file so that all my formatting and whatnot get changed. So I never liked that approach because it's too manual. Let's do clear all the outputs. So let's see how. So what I did was I said, well, I'm going to take the export CSV concept, and I started wrapping this library that Microsoft provided and said, well, I'm going to wrap it and work with the PowerShell idiomatics and say, all right, let me do the same concepts, but I'm going to do it to Excel, not to CSV. So here, I'm going to do the same thing, get service, export Excel. I'm not going to give it a file name. I give it a bunch of defaults. If you just say, take whatever data you have and then pipe it into export Excel, it sets a bunch of things for you. Let's see what happens. We should get the same errors, which have nothing to do with PowerShell on my side. So, okay, and we launch and it automatically launches. So this is what PowerShell just did. It took that same data we saw before, but I set it up so that you could have filtering, right? It set it up so that you could do zebra striping. And all these properties are available to you within the PowerShell module. This is just the default if you want to get running and see how it works. So again, we have the filtering that we like in PowerShell. And I created the zebra striping because I can affect the named ranges, and I created a table of all this data. So now when I actually do this, I can save it, I can make adjustments, and it's going to save as an Excel file. And even if you just do this with the data that you have and you send it to management or your friends or your colleagues, all of a sudden they have a whole different range of capability, and they don't have to worry about how it gets handled, or they can use their standard interface knowledge of Excel to do what they need to do. So let's move on. So now, okay, let's see what we can really do with this. So now I'm just going to do a get process on my machine. We're going to move away from services, and I'm just going to subset the data. I only want stuff that has a company set up, and I want to say select the company name and the number of handles for each process. I want to create a title, and I can use PowerShell to do string interpolation, right? So I can do a get date in this string, and then I'm going to pipe that data into ImportExcel. I'm going to tell it the path I want to do it, right? ps.xlsx, and I'm going to use properties on that ImportExcel to do a table name of processes. I want to do an auto size, and I'm going to poke in the title. So if I run this, it'll run. Nothing happens. Now you go, oh man, that's not good. There's a reason for that. But if I want to actually see the file, because it did get created, the ps.xlsx got created in PowerShell, I can do something called invoke item. So when I do the invoke item, okay, it will actually launch based on the extension. It'll launch the appropriate piece or the application that can work with it. Up top, you can see it actually picked the date local to my machine. And by doing things like process, auto size, by doing the table name, I get some automatic things like the automatic filtering. And there's my processes name range for the entire table. And now I can do whatever I'd like. So this is just some simple stuff to show you some of the capabilities, right? Now, if I wanted to get those processes, right, if I ran this, right, if I wanted to get that into Excel, right, I could save it to CSV, and then I can bring it into Excel, and then I can manually do all those pieces that I just showed you, auto size everything. It's just a lot of repetitive toiling work that you can make a lot of mistakes getting there. So moving on. Now, remember when we ran this, I had to open it up with a separate command called invoke item. So when I'm building my spreadsheets, when I'm using this tool, right, I'm a developer and I'm lazy. So one of the things I do is I'll start with the data, I'll export it, and then I have a thing called a -show switch. And that's what you think it might be. I run it, and it automatically shows. Now here, this is just the plain data. I didn't do the auto sizing. I didn't name the table. I didn't do any named ranges. So this is just the pure raw data. But now you can see that I actually can run this and show the Excel. So it saves me a step. And that's what I do when I iterate building reports. So why is that important? So now we're going to do it again. And right, so I run it, same exact thing, but now I created a file called PSXLSX, and right, but it doesn't show. It's not a problem. Why is this approach good? Because when you run it on a server, you don't have to have Excel installed. That's one of the beauties of this PowerShell module. You can actually sit, and if you don't have Excel installed, yes, you can't display the XLSX, but you can build them. So if I'm running it on a server or in an Azure function or a GitHub action, I don't need to install Excel engine, the Excel application, on that target machine. This will run and build that for you. So what's cool about that is I can sit there and I can create I have applications with my GitHub actions, for example, where people upload CSV files or they upload a bunch of JSON data or all the kinds of information. And I use a PowerShell script that reads that information, does all the magical visualizations, creates the XLSS, and checks it back into GitHub. And then people go up to GitHub and they can either download it or view it directly or whatever way they'd like. And that same conceptual process works on Azure functions, works in AWS, works on a server. You can actually sit on your own servers. People run this in their server farms to collect information about that. And then they save the XLSX file and they either email it or they send the link or they put it up in SharePoint and they're off to the races. And clearly, you know, I haven't shown everything that you can do with this library yet, but just this simple piece alone, it saves people tons of time to just create a bunch of Excel reports, drop them wherever people can get to, and they don't have to sit and manually do this kind of work day in, day out.
I have two questions, Doug.
Yes.
One is, can you save also XLSB file? It has to be only XLSX file.
Okay.
And second question, what about security? Once you can go to the task manager and get all the processes, you can do whatever you want with the computer. Can you elaborate more about security?
Okay. So when you're saying you can go to the task manager, is that what?
Yes.
Right. So just to talk to that one point first, I'm not sure what kind of security you're looking for, but yeah, PowerShell has access. If you're running as admin on your machine, you have access to all the stuff. So, you know, if you want to have a lockdown account, if you run PowerShell in that lockdown account, then you can work security from that perspective. Additionally,
shut down the firewall, the antivirus.
Exactly. Well, yeah. So PowerShell, you know, it's unfortunately, or I don't know if it's fortunate or unfortunate that most, you know, people like to use PowerShell to even do malware, right? So because it's on most every machine, it's on every Windows machine. And if you don't lock down your stuff, right, they can get in there and inject a bad script. So if you're running this kind of stuff, there's nothing special that I do inside of here. You have to handle all the security mechanisms, and then PowerShell will adhere to those mechanisms, right? And then you can keep people from looking at certain kinds of info or doing whatever malware, bad actor type stuff. I don't know if that answers the question.
It sounds from the security point of view, PowerShell is very dangerous.
You could look at it as very dangerous, but if there's lots of different controls that you can use on PowerShell, there's all kinds of auditing and checks that you can do. You can make it so that whatever machine this is on, a server or other user machines, you can disable all kinds of access. So it's like any other application, and you can toggle and lock it down as far as you want. You could even go as far as what they call language restriction mode, where you turn that on and you can't execute a whole bunch of range of commands. And if you actually then start using things like PowerShell and you install the Azure module, they adhere to those security guidelines so that certain commands cannot be run. So yeah, don't just throw PowerShell on your box. You have to be aware of what the security implications are, and then as an admin for that box, turn on and turn off what you want. So there's nothing magical in the Excel module that I built. It adheres to all, but if you start turning, if you start turning those knobs and dials on security, it'll adhere to that. Can you save an XLSB file? I hope that answers it. I'm not a security expert with it. I usually, if I come in and do this stuff, I say, well, where's the security experts? And then they point them to all the security information about PowerShell. So you can get comfortable with if you think it's a PowerShell is a good thing for you or not.
You don't have statistics to know how many viruses or malware came through PowerShell.
Yeah, actually, I think the PowerShell and Microsoft keep track of that. And so you can search for that and figure that out. Additionally, Microsoft within the recent years have been, security is number one, especially what was the recent outage that took out most of, I don't know if it took out Europe and your area as well, but was it Cloudflare? I'm not sure, I don't remember.
CrowdStrike.
Yeah. So they did, right? And it's those kind of incidents, and it wasn't specifically a Microsoft issue, but Microsoft is, in the last number of months since that, they've stepped up all their security has always been number one, and now it's like priority 0. And yeah, PowerShell is a good attack vector, and you need to make yourself aware of what it is, why it is, how these things work, and they keep statistics about that because it's very important to an organization. As far as save, I don't work with XSLBs on a regular basis. You can read them, and I would need to get back to you on. I'm pretty sure. Let me see if I can do a PS export Excel. Let's see if I can do right here. I'm not sure if I can dot. So let's B. And I should have subsetted that data because it's going to try to bring in everything. Or is it not going to work?
They said you don't need Excel on the server, so writing XLSB sounds like you need to have an Excel to write an XLSB.
Let's see how this goes first, and then I'm going to say select first 5. We'll go for 4. Nope. So yeah, so I can't write XSLBs, and actually I should put a message in there that you can't. You can read them, but I don't support writing them.
Okay.
So thanks for the question. Good stuff. All right, so let's talk a little bit about any other questions on either one of those that I didn't answer deep enough. So let's talk about conditional formatting. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to grab the data service again and just pull out the status, name, display, and start type. And we'll just take a look first at what it looks like in a raw format. All right, so this is the status, name, display name, start type on the services on my machine. All right, let's get out of that. And notice I use the auto size on there so that everything lined up kind of nicely. And I use the show. Let's get rid of that file. We're going to run it again, but now what I'm going to do is there's something in the library called new conditional text. And I'm going to pass the word stop into it. Say, okay, I want to do a conditional text on the word stop. I'm going to export the data again. And then there's a parameter on ImportExcel called conditional text. And I'm going to pass in the new one I just created. And we'll see if that changes the actual output. So what this does, right, if we...
in home.
Thank you. So if we go up to conditional here, when we manage rules, what that piece did, it sets up it set up that rule for conditional formatting, right? So again, it's automating what you want. So that's doing some conditional formats. Let's do multiple conditionals. So now if I want to do the same data, but I want conditional text on the stop, RUNN, and SVC, and then you can change the colors, text color to background colors, and conditional text takes an array, and off we go. So now I'm getting to a point Now I can just sit here and run this report on a regular basis. Notice there's no zebra striping, but I could add things like, filtering, charts, all that kind of stuff. We'll get to that in a second. So this, for me, this begins to answer like, oh, I have a better way to actually do visualizations and pass my data around the company. We can also do conditional icons if that's your thing. So now I'm going to move over and grab the process data again, right? Company name, I guess it's physical memory handles, and then doing a star, mem star, and a select object says anything, any property name with mem in it, I want that as well. And I'm going to do some formatting the icon set, and I'm going to do it on a range of C:C. So A, B, C. So on physical memory, I'm going to add this conditional format. I want a 3-icon set. I want arrows. That looks like a mistake. Let's see if it runs. Take that out. And now I'm going to export this again. I'm going to do a show. I'm going to auto size everything and pass in that conditional format. So now, typical in Excel, right? Set up the icon set. We can see that some arrows are a different color, pointing differently. Come back to managing the rules. And it just basically set all this up. And you have control over what values you like, what icons you want, if you want it based on percent number formula. So this, again, now becomes automatable from PowerShell, if that's what you want. It works based on how Excel looks at the range of data that you provided, and then it figures out what arrows apply to what. And then, of course, you can combine both. I can do conditional formatting I can add an icon set, and I can add conditional text. So we'll do the same one we did before with the 3 with the arrows. And then we're also going to say, we'll just colorize anything with the word Microsoft in it. So now we start to get these kind of things if this is what's things that you like. All right, so that's just conditional formatting. Anything, questions on that at this point? All good?
All good.
Excellent. So that's writing. That's one of the, so that's this Excel, the export Excel has lots and lots of different things you can do with writing. I'll show some more things with pivot tables and charts coming up, but let's talk about reading data, right? There's tons of people out there that say, hey, I've got 55 worksheets. They have all this stuff. I just want to pull out this data, this data, this data from all different things and create a new spreadsheet, or I just want to read the data and then export it, import it into my SQL database or pass it off to my REST endpoints and have it update. I need to pass JSON. So you can actually do things like import your Excel, convert in PowerShell. You can do something called convert to JSON, and then you can then pipe it. If you write a function that says, okay, pipe it to this REST endpoint, and then let it do its magic. So that's one of the things I like about it. About PowerShell, you get data into PowerShell, and then things begin to light up because you can pivot, so to speak, and save your data, format your data to do lots of different things. So I have in here I have something called a directory called sales data, right? I just have April through September, January through December. So I have 12 spreadsheets. And one of the functions I have is called get Excel file summary. So if you do a directory where you have a bunch of Excel files, I go in, I open each file, and I come back with information. So this is kind of like a data science approach. Like, what data do I have? What's going on? I can see the Excel name. I can see where the file is. I can know things like they're all basically the same. I can know what address, like some of the files maybe have the data in different places, right? I can know how many rows and if the actual spreadsheet is visible or not. So it's a good way. That's the way I approach a problem. And I say, okay, what do I have here? How many files do I have? What's inside the files? Here I only have sheet 1 for each one, but you can have 55 sheets in one, 3 sheets in another, and all that information shows up here. So now what are we going to do? Let's play around. So let's say I wanted to look at February and August, but I only wanted the first 5 objects for each one. Okay. So I can run that. And that's basically, I didn't put any dates or months in it, but this is 10 rows of data, but it's from 2 different spreadsheets. So that's how quick it is. I'll just run it again because I like that one. So, right. So I can just, if you're looking at 2 spreadsheets, 50 spreadsheets, And you're not limited to saying just the first 5 records. On ImportExcel, you can say, oh, my data starts in row 50, but column Z, and wherever the data may exist, you can actually go in and slice and dice using the ImportExcel. So let's also, another thing you want to do is maybe you get something like, okay, I have all these months, right, of data. Let's take all those separate files, and I want to make one workbook called yearly sales, right? And each tab, I want to put the data from that month, right? So using PowerShell, I can say, get child items like a DIR or an LS, grab all those Excel files. From that workbook, I can get the base name of it, like January, February, March, April. And then I can say export that data by importing that data. And you can do this any way that you're comfortable with how to build this up and read the data, then write it, whatever you need to do. And I'm going to create a new file, yearly sales, XLSX, name the worksheet that we pulled out, January, February, March. Again, auto size, auto filter table. I'm going to build a table based on the workbook name. And then when I'm done reading those 12, creating the 12 tabs, at the end, I'm going to do an invoke item and display it. Let's see what we get. That's fine. So in 2 seconds, right, we read 1,200 records, and we split that out into different tabs inside of a spreadsheet. Right. So we went from 12 spreadsheets to 1. This goes on and on and on of what you can do with this kind of approach, right? If you want to start doing additional calculations, add columns, do checking, that's what this starts to open up. Now, as you saw, I'm going to run this one more time, see what happens the second time. Notice that the months are not in order. So somebody comes back and says, hey, why can't we get it January to December? So just to have fun, show you another feature of the library. I'm just going to create what they call an array in PowerShell, name it January to December, put those values in there. You can actually open Excel, do an open -Excel package. What that does is you're not importing or exporting, you're just opening it up and getting access to the object model. I have things, a whole bunch of different functions inside PowerShell Excel module, one of them being add worksheet. So what I'm doing here is based on that open Excel package, I'm going to take that worksheet name and move it to the end. So I'm going to, and then this is a weird way to do sorting. And I'm going to now run this again. It's on that same Excel that we just created, the yearly. And now that just puts everything in order. You can colorize tabs. You can change all kinds of things. You can rename them, so on and so forth. So depending on what you're trying to get done in your organization, you can read, write, manipulate spreadsheets, where they live, where they don't live, the names of the sheets, so on and so forth.
Good questions.
Any questions? Yeah.
Yeah. In the first part, I think you can do mostly what you showed with the VBS file.
Absolutely. With VB script?
Yes.
You can do this in
Excel, visible, not visible. You can write the VB language in a text file.
Yep.
We can schedule it to run it, let's say, at 10 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
That's number one. So is there a difference? And second, in terms of efficiency, if I can read everything using Python with the Panda package,
yep.
In terms of efficiency, which one is more efficient? Yours or...
Okay. Good question. So Visual Basic Script, you can skin the cat any way you'd like. You can do this in Visual Basic Script. You can do this in VBA. PowerShell is a more modern language. It has something called the Object Flow Engine. So you're working with, as you can see, when you're exporting types of things into Excel or reading, you're using, instead of parsing and praying, as we say in the Python world, you're using these newer techniques, which I find much easier. If you're comfortable with Visual Basic Script, VBS and VBA, continue with that. VBS is going to be more verbose. So again, over the years, I mean, PowerShell's been around for almost 20 years at this point. So if you look, one of the original things we used to do was take, hundreds of lines of Visual Basic Script and show you how you can do it in 2-3 lines of PowerShell. So, but you have to learn how PowerShell works. So it may not be worth your time in that when you're comfortable with VBS. If you're comfortable with the language Perl, you're going to stay with that and not move to Python. So yeah, there's no magic bullet. There's no silver bullet for this kind of stuff. It's really, I did this because I like working in PowerShell. And then as to the question of pandas, so pandas and Python are written in C, right? Their base language is C, and the base language that PowerShell was written in is C#. So if you do comparisons in terms of performance, they're equivalent. In fact, at one point, Microsoft wrote something called IronPython, which was going to be a competition to Python, which they dropped over time. And now they just recently incorporated Python inside of Excel on M365. It all depends on what you want. They're all tuned for different things. Is there a performance? If you're, give it a try. You know, yes, my module using the .NET framework, it's as performant in most things. Pandas gives you a whole different range of capabilities that you don't have in PowerShell.
Okay.
All right, so now you can come back and we can start taking a look at the charting data. So here I'm just going to take and use this information about some products. And what I'm doing here is just laying it out in a CSV format using PowerShell to do a convert from CSV. And that converts it into a PowerShell array, a bunch of objects with property names. And I'm going to set, the path. I want to turn on auto filtering, auto size, auto name range, and then show the actual information. So here I have something called a new Excel chart definition. And I'm going to say, well, I want to take, so instead of looking at what ranges of data in the Excel sheet, like am I looking from C1 to C10, so on and so forth, I've actually used auto name range, which sets all that up for me based on the property names of the data being supplied. And since I know that information coming in, this is just makes it easier to say, okay, I just want to do a Y of price and X range of product in creating my chart. And then I want to just give it a title. I don't want a legend. Here's the height. And I pipe that data out. And we get what we'd expect. We get the data and we get a chart. And this all works with, if I start doing things like I just want to see hammers and saws, and the chart updates the stuff that we expect from Excel. So again, all this stuff is doable in if you're a Go programmer, if you're a Rust programmer, they have they have Excel integration. So it all depends on whatever company you're working in, what language, and each language is tuned for something different and makes some things easier, some things difficult. So that's up to you. I decided to go to PowerShell route.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah. Question?
Yeah.
And of course, you can do multiple charts. So I'll take the same data. And now what I want to do is put 3 charts on there: price and product, total and product, quantity and product. And I'm going to place them right in my Excel sheet at the different rows and columns. So you have a whole range. And if I wanted to, I'm using column charts here. I could change some to bar, some to pie charts, etc. So you have a full range of chart types. I don't know if I'll show that next in this. So, and what's nice about PowerShell is because I'm interacting with the .NET framework, I'm able to pull out all the information of what the enums are. So I can leverage PowerShell to do things like, okay, I don't have to look up what kind of charts I can do. I can just hit -chart type space, control space, and use tab completion. And
these methods are coming from the .NET framework.
That's right. So yeah, once you learn how to use PowerShell in building libraries, you can start leveraging these types of techniques so that your functions in your libraries can actually take advantage of these things that make life easy, so you don't have to send people off for documentation. All right. And then I got a couple of ones here. We can do trend lines as well. That's all plugged into the module. This one's kind of boring, but right. So it's the same data. So you have access and control over all the charting types. And this goes on and on and on. And pretty much all the stuff, all the object model is exported or surfaced in the PowerShell module. And again, to the person's point about pandas, right? So pandas, and there's a thing called PyOrg or Excel.org. There's a bunch of Python tools that actually have done this over the years. They weren't around when I built this. I built this way back. And again, you know, it was good that the DOJ made Microsoft make this available as XML, so we can actually interact with the Excel SX directly. And then you can write these kind of libraries on top of everything, right? You can make these things happen with any language. Again, Go and Rust are relatively new, and they have those capabilities using the same approach in their languages. So if you're a Rustacean, or however they say, you can be inside of Rust. If you need an Excel, drop an Excel report, you're ready to go. So now let's play with some pivot tables. Any other questions, or continue on?
Continue.
So we can do a get process. Again, we're going to just grab the same data, but now I'm going to export the data. And now I'm going to say you can include a pivot table, and I want a chart, and I'm going to tell it to pivot on the company name. And the data is I want to sum the handles. So here we see all the data, and then we get a second sheet down here, and we can actually see it did all the pivoting for us, so to speak. So if you know how pivot tables work, I think they're pretty easy to set up in this way, and we can do other pivot tables. So here I'm going to do the same one, and we just see what kind of chart type you can do. Again, you get the data, and then you can manipulate the chart types to whatever you'd like, as well as all the different kinds of aspects and when you do standard pivoting in Excel, all available through that. Let's open up the multiple. So this one gets a little more involved in terms of knowing PowerShell. So I'm going to take this data, region, date, fruit, and I'm going to convert that so it can be used from CSV into PowerShell. And then I'm going to create a pivot table, and then I'm going to show things like group date row. So you can do things based on taking a date and looking at the quarters, looking at the months, years, and whatnot. So, and I'm going to create, I guess, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pivots on or about. And I'm going to pivot them based on region, fruit, and date, fruit, region, date, region, fruit, typical data science stuff, right? And that's going to create multiple charts on that data. And this is what I get in the spreadsheet. And as we can see, this is just leveraging one of the things I like about Excel, once you set these things up, you can do it by hand, but now I can knock out a whole bunch of different tables. And this whole thing here, doing it by dates and quarters, is just telling the pivot tables, hey, this is a group based on this date, and it handles the year, quarter, so on. Yeah, and that's obviously not that much data, but you get the idea. This is going to be as slow as Excel is, right? So if I had 50,000 rows, inserting the data into Excel is no big deal. There are people that use this library, and they process hundreds of thousands of rows, both reading and writing, which is super quick. It's not minutes, it's seconds. And then you can actually do what you want. And this is all based on Excel being quick.
But here you add every pivot table by itself, so every pivot table has its cache memory. They don't share the same cache memory.
Nope, but you can enable that in the PowerShell too, if you want. So again, so I'm just leveraging the XML that's inside the XLSX. And by doing that is you can set up all those different options through the XML. I'm not directly manipulating the XML, but all of those pieces are exposed in the PowerShell module to do that if you need that capability. I don't want to say that my stuff is easy, but because I have to be aware of those things and make it available in an API in my SDK. But the best part is that I didn't have to come up with all that work to figure out the caches. I'm just basically setting properties on the pivot tables that get created, right? So if you look at, this looks, I don't know if this looks complicated to people or not, but knowing things that, you have a dot pivot rows and these different options, you have to know about them. So you have to discover what's in the SDK, but then you have the capabilities.
Maybe instead of add pivot table, you can copy pivot table and change the.
Absolutely. And what's really cool about it is, that's a good point. So instead of an add, you have a copy. So if you have an existing one or a template, if there's something that's not in my Excel library, when you do the open Excel package, you have access to the object model. So you can actually build that yourself. And it's not that hard, right? If you're doing it in PowerShell. It's not hard to do it in PowerShell, but that all those objects and the object models are available to you, so you can write your own. And there have been, again, that's why I have the discussions on my GitHub repo. People have done that, show how to do it. You don't have to be waiting for me to write a new feature or a new function for you to have that capability. You can access the object model A to Z. And people have been doing this stuff in the Windows world with ASP.NET, C# and F# for years. I was a little earlier doing it and getting it done in PowerShell. And again, depends on your job, right? If you're an F# coder. So how many people here know about quantum and the language Q#, right? So I thought it was pretty funny. So at one point, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, I was like, okay, what's new that I can learn? And I was like, let's go learn about Q# and do some quantum. And I bought a couple of books and I started looking into how that works. And I was like, this is a crazy language. And lo and behold, one of the examples was they did a whole bunch of stuff in quantum, and then they got the results, and then they used my Excel module to actually show reports with it. Why? Because Q# is based on .NET. So, they're not going to go to a Pandas or a Python or a Rust or a Go. But the PowerShell module is available, and they were like, oh, so we just do all our stuff, drop it out. I talked to the authors of the book, and they work at Microsoft as researchers, and I got really cool interactions with the quantum folks. But again, it all depends what your job is, right? So if they were doing at AWS and they were doing that quantum work, I don't know what that's written in, but if it's not written in .NET, you might drop into Rust, Go, or Python. There is no I understand the argument of, which is more performant, which is this. All depends on what you're trying to get done and, what you're working in.
And what do you know?
I'm sorry?
And what do you know?
Exactly.
If you don't know Python, don't use Python.
Exactly. There you go. And, when I was looking at Python, I was there when Guido von Rossum created Python, and I was like, this is really cool. And I worked in Wall Street, and I guess it was, when was it? 94, 95? God, we're throwing out dates. And I started looking at Python. I was like, wow, this thing is really cool. And I think at the time, it was all C++ that we were doing. And I was starting to show people about Python. And the first thing they said was like, we work in static languages, Doug. We don't work with dynamic languages. There's too many problems. And I'm like, well, that all depends. And I worked, I played with Python for years. I never became a professional coder in it. But it was so much pushback in the Wall Street space at the time, I gave it up. And then what's interesting is that today, Python got us to AI and OpenAI. And that's kind of interesting that that's where we are. So again, it's what it's hilarious, crazy stuff. Take bioinformatics, just as another example. And I played around with bioinformatics at one point decades ago, just because I thought it would be fun to look into it. And it was around the Python time, and I was trying to do it in a different language. I was like, well, let me read these files these PDB files PDBs, PVDs, I don't know. And let me take a look, crack them open, figure them out. They have all the genomic structures in it, and I want to see if I can play with it, slice and dice. And I didn't know the language they were using. I think it was Python. I was like, okay, I'm going to do it in my stuff. And that's just what I did, because that's the language I knew. And I came up with some really slick tools that these people were like, oh, wow, this is great. Is it a Python library? And I go, no. They go, oh, I can't use it. I'm like, sorry. Well, maybe you can build it. So yeah.
So I can assume that in the end of the lecture, you'll tell us what to buy on the stock market.
Me?
Yes. After years in Wall Street, you should know what to buy.
I'm not a speculator in the market. Put your money in index funds. Don't take stock market information advice from a PowerShell guy. It won't be.
Use Power Tools to analyze NASDAQ.
But yes, and that's the funny thing. It's like I worked in a lot of trading. I've worked at Morgan Stanley. I've worked at Solomon Brothers, a whole bunch of different companies, and I would bring my Excel capabilities to better visualize and understand the data that they were working with for the traders. So it was a funny process. Anyway, that's kind of the end of my PowerShell stuff in Excel. If you want to, if you have questions or you'd like me to try something and show you, happy to do that. But I did want to show one last piece for folks who are interested in OpenAI and the whole rage of ChatGPT and GPTs and whatnot. It's so cool. It all comes full circle. So OpenAI, like 2-3 years ago, right? As they released in 2022 in November, ChatGPT, which is turning 2 this month, and I'll be doing a live stream recapping what's happened in the last couple of years with OpenAI, ChatGPT, Microsoft, Google, Meta. If you get on my meetup page, I'll be doing a talk on that. November 21st or 28th or something like that. And so they
2-3 weeks.
Yeah. I do them monthly. I have a premium offering as well as I talk about, and I have people on my live streams that I have something called 2.5 Geeks, where we talk about and we talk with AI, people in the industry that are doing AI type stuff, what they're doing, how they're doing it, what they see. And I bring what I see. I'm completely committed to AI at this point, what it provides. But to the point about OpenAI, when they first released ChatGPT on the web, and they had 100 million users in 3 days, something like that. They also released an API that you could actually interact with the AI models on their back end. And of course, it was all written in Python. And one of the demos I saw Microsoft do at one of the Build conferences, I think it was, they showed a demo where in the command line, you could do something like, let's see, I already have it right. You could do something like, so is that big enough font? I can make it bigger. Let's go a little bit. Go up one. So in Python, they could type in something like, what's my IP? All right. So you do a command and then you'd have a shortcut key in Python. And then what that would do is this would be your prompt. And this prompt would be passed back up to the OpenAI model. And I was like, whoa, that's pretty slick. And then they took the demo one step further and they did it. They said, oh, we tied it into PowerShell too. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, this is going to be cool. And sure enough, it worked. And I'll show you that in a second. But I was like, well, they had it up on GitHub. I pulled down the library that they demoed with. And I was like, oh, if people are going to use this in PowerShell, they have to install Python and Anaconda and all of that. And I was like, I don't want that. So I dug a little deeper. And all it was REST endpoint calls. I was like, whoa, this is amazing. And then they started talking about how they democratized access to AI because it's all through REST. It's not a proprietary interface. So I looked at their Python SDK and I was like, you know what? I'm going to port all of this into PowerShell. And that's what I've been doing for 2 years. So I have something. So my PowerShell module is called PSAI, PowerShell AI. So you can do an install -module, PSAI. And you have this thing in here called enable shortcut key. And now I'm going to hit Control-Shift-G, and hopefully this works. And what this hopefully will do is, as you can see, that took my question, that took my prompt, sent it to OpenAI's model, and it came back and said, oh, and I've tuned the prompt so it works in PowerShell. So it says, okay, you're a PowerShell expert. I gave it a persona. I gave it this, that. Always come back with PowerShell code. So it took my prompt, what is my IP, sent it up, all that information, and it came back from the model and said, oh, you want to use this? And there you go. So now I can sit here and do all kinds of fun stuff. Let's do first, since it's election day, presidents. So it's not limited to just, oh, actually it is. Actually, I make it come back with code. So, and what I'm doing is I'm inserting it into the PowerShell context. So you can actually run it. Now, if you look at it, let's try and get to the right thing here one more time. So when you run it, Control-Shift-G, it doesn't execute straight away. And those came back with a different answer because it's stochastic. So you can eyeball it and you can hit Control-C and not run it, or you can go ahead and run it, or you can go ahead and copy it, whatever you'd like to do. So
you can ask me what are the current results of today.
Yes, but not with this part. One of the challenges with the model is it's all based on training data, right? So the training data is of, let's say the latest models are of October 2023. You actually need to hook up tools, which is what we call function calling, where not that the AI model calls the function, but when you pass in the information, you pass in a list of tools it can work with. And then it says, oh, you have a web search tool. Okay, great. Please go ahead and call your web search tool that has...
summarize the data from the web.
There you go. But I'm going to summarize the data from a different perspective. So that's a great segue. So now I have all these different tools. So I have something that you can chat with your data. So I have a file called import sales data. We saw this before. So at the command line, if I want to look at what's inside of Excel without spinning it up using just PowerShell, I can use import Excel, take my sales data. There we have it. I'm going to save that to a variable, $data. So now we have our data there. But now here's what's cool. I want to chat with my data. So I've extended PowerShell capabilities so that on variable types, you have a chat method. And now I can say something like explain. So now I'm actually taking that data, passing it up to AI, and asking it to explain it. So it tells me all the structure of the data. This categorizes the states into geographical areas, so on and so forth. And it even starts saying like, well, Texas, 927 units. There we go, right? So it actually read the data, and it's now giving me insights into what's there and what's going on, right? Now, I want to take the demo a little bit further, but just note that this data was sent to OpenAI, right? Now, you have to trust them to say, oh, will they not share my data? Will they not train on my data? And I would not send my checking account data to them, but there's a whole bunch of stuff that can be done here that should be fine. In addition, my module works with Azure OpenAI. So Azure offers OpenAI as services that you can spin up. And then my module, you set a couple of endpoints, and then exactly what you see here will happen against your Azure resource installation. And so there, Microsoft says they don't train on your data, they don't keep the data, and everything's within your tenant. And again, you have all the controls necessary if you're comfortable with how Azure works with their security. And I'll be setting this up to work with Bedrock, which is the AWS installation, right? So that if you're more comfortable or you work with AWS in your company or Azure or whatnot, whoever you're more comfortable with, this will work. So let's take this a little further. So remember, in $data, we have this. So you can start doing things like give me in. So so this is a prompt, right? And basically prompts are programs. And this prompt, I'm saying, give me insights as a data scientist. So I'm taking that data, passing it back up, and then the model is going to look at it and then hopefully respond with something that's useful and interesting, which it typically does. And it just did a whole bunch of data science analysis on it, right? Now, this is what they call a minimal effort prompt. This is like, what, less than 10 words? You can put a sentence, you can put 5 sentences, you can put paragraphs, you can help direct it in lots of different ways. And it comes back and tells me performance-wise, the highest units sold were in Texas, so on and so on and so on. And what's cool is if you know Markdown, you can see that this looks like Markdown, right? This is a title, this is bolding. And what's cool is I have something called, this is a Golang tool called Glow. So I'm going to run that again. So when I'm sitting here doing certain kinds of working with stuff and data, I'll work this out and then I'll pipe it into Glow. Next, it looks better, but it's kind of boring. But let's kick up the prompt a little bit, and I'll just say in a table. right? So these are little prompt engineering tricks that you begin to learn. You want it in a table, you want it in CSV format, you want it in JSON format, you want it in Parquet format. And now when I get the information back from AI, it actually formatted all that stuff in a table. It added total revenue, so it calculated that out, told me some stuff about categories. I get some colorization, and it's a party. Again, this is all available in my PSAI module. Be careful when you use it, because you'll be sending the data back to OpenAI. If you do spin up some stuff in Azure, that will be maybe gives you more comfort. And this will work exactly as that. This is not even sticking our toes in the kiddie pool for what this module brings. And it, the module brings this, but it's really just, I ported everything from OpenAI from their Python into PowerShell. If you want to do this all in Python, go grab their modules, go grab their packages. Almost everybody in the industry has built Rust, C#, F#, so on and so on and so on. I like this the best because I get to use it all at the command line. I get to use it in Azure Functions and chat and GitHub Actions and so on. So now I've taken my Excel data and I'm chatting with AI to do all kinds of stuff. And that's perfect timing because I got to catch a train shortly.
Amazing.
Awesome. Any question? And again, get on, let's see, get on my New York. I don't know if you can see that.
Yes, I'm going to see PowerShell meetup.
Yep. I'll be doing a I'm going to throw a birthday party for ChatGPT. It's 2 years old. There's more stuff coming out tomorrow after the election from OpenAI. They've held back from releasing more stuff because they didn't want people to use AI as a malware type process. And I'm not sure that helped, but I'll be talking about all kinds of stuff from them, Google Gemini, Meta's Llama. The whole AI space is fascinating. As another point, you can actually upload data into the back end, and you can you can say, hey, enable the code analysis, right? Which is, it spins up Python in a sandbox on a Docker container on their server, and you can ask it to generate charts, generate Excel files, all kinds of different things. Now it's AI, so you have to really start getting good at prompt engineering, but the results are mind blowing, and I cover that as well. So
not only we need more than 24 hours a day, we need also more than 120 years to live.
It's funny you say about living, because a lot of, with all the stuff that's being announced in the AI space and at the speed, people say all the stuff is here. It's coming in even faster. Just don't die. And that's, and I totally, exactly. It's crazy. It's crazy. And then like you said, trying to find time to sleep. I work 7 days a week. I don't, this stuff is, I've never seen things like AI and this provide what it does. And there's a lot of deniers. There's a lot of doomers about what it is. Oh, it doesn't do this. Yeah, but it's a whole new world. And, Microsoft is wrapping it up and giving it to us in IDEs. There's a whole bunch of IDEs, non-Microsoft out there that are doing as great a work and keeping Microsoft's feet to the fire to make better work. So yeah, there are turnkey solutions to get a lot done, but man, wow, can you build some really slick AI native systems? And for me, I just do it all in PowerShell, and I can put NLP, natural language processing, on my scripts and give them to my clients. So now they're not worrying about calling functions with parameters. They're actually just asking questions and letting it do its thing.
And you tell them that you're answering the questions.
Absolutely.
And of course, build them.
100% correct. We haven't even talked about autonomous agents, which I have part of this PSAI, whereas I can actually create agents really easily based on things like LangChain, how they did it, how AutoGen and all these different libraries. I think they went over the top, and we'll see if they survive the next release from OpenAI. But autonomous agents are, hey, let this thing run for 2 days, collect information, or I can spin up 10 of them for 10 different clients, and I'll get answers back in an hour, and then I can send that to the client and charge. So yeah, that's the thinking. So we'll see.
I have no words to thank you. It's really amazing. And
glad you liked it. Hope it was useful.
Yes, totally.
Cool.
So
Happy
I'll meet
to.
you on your meetup meeting.
I'm sorry.
I'll see you on your meetup meeting.
Awesome. Everybody's invited. If you're just an enthusiast, great. If you're a PowerShell person, great. The cool things about it is that I demo it in PowerShell, but all the concepts are the same across any language.
How much time do you think I need to invest to learn using PowerShell?
Well, how well do you know PowerShell?
None. Zero.
All right.
I tried to play with it, but not everything you showed on your YouTube works on my computer. And once I get the mistakes, I have no idea how to correct them.
Oh, interesting. So watch this. 1 divided by 0, right? Let's say you don't know what that is. This could be an error from anything. I have another thing called Q, which you ask a question. And I'm going to type in that error. It's going off to AI. And now, right in my console, this error indicates exactly what I want, right? So I don't have to go Google. I don't have to go to Stack Overflow. I can do in seconds what would take me minutes to search for. That's part of my PSAI as well. And it's free. Now, how long can this help you? How quickly get up the ramp? Yeah, PowerShell, it's like another language. PowerShell is a different way of doing things. So, but some of the examples that I show and the stuff on my GitHub and the tutorials I have, you can type in Q, right? And you can type in your question, right?
It is to understand what you are doing, not just typing.
Yeah, and I can say what's kind of cool is with this Q capability, right? I can do something like I'm gonna even misspell it, a greet function, because let's see what happens. Look at it, that's a wacky prompt. I'm not spelling the word correctly, and I'm gonna say FN. Look at that. I just got a PowerShell greet product. Greet. Now let's say I didn't like the word greet. Name function verb noun. Now you may not know that about PowerShell. But this is, you didn't want that. So that was almost right. So it did create it in verb noun, but it took me, that's the challenge. Verb, noun, this is not going to work, but we'll try it anyway. Noun, compliant. I didn't think it would work. Okay, so let's just break out of that real quick and just do this really once again. Let's see, right? What's cool about this is, notice I say that your next steps, you can either follow up, which is what I was doing. I was refining my prompt. I was having a conversation with the AI because I gave this thing memory. So it remembers the conversation that I keep giving to the model. So you can just easily say, oh, I don't want the function. I don't want a parameter with string. Do this, this, and this. And that doesn't look right. But anyway, or you can press enter and it copies it to your clipboard. I don't think it's going to work, but oh, there we go. And then I can say greet. So now I just greet user. And so now this is a simple example, but that's using the model to do whatever. Now let's see if I can just, if I have this in it's not limited to PowerShell. Delete an element from a list in Golang. Okay, no problem. So that's what this thing gives you the capability. So it's actually taking this, sending it to OpenAI, sending it to a model. We're getting a result. I can copy and paste that. Pressing enter, I copied it. There it is. If I was inside of my editor, I could be popping this into my code. AI is not going to replace you, but someone who knows how to use AI will.
Yeah.
So now how much time do you have to learn this? You can start doing this today, learning any language that you prefer to interact with, whatever. And the cool part is I'm doing this in PowerShell, but the concepts go over to whatever language you're comfortable with. Now, not everybody's doing what I'm doing here. They're not wrapping it to make life easy, but you can see how it, and then you go, oh, maybe I can build that in Python, or maybe I can build that concept in Rust, or maybe I'm going to do it in Scala, right? It's up to you, right? They've democratized AI. It's crazy. So this is just an API call. It's just a REST endpoint. I'm just passing a bunch of a prompt. I'm passing text back to a model. The model's passing back the code. And then I'm using this for code.
You're the negotiator.
Okay, you got it. Great way to put it. This is a co-pilot. You're the pilot, right?
Yeah.
And so anyway, love to see you at the meetups.
Yes. So again, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.